Welcome to a new video on the photography minimalist. I hope you're all doing okay in this corona crisis. We're staying indoors in the Netherlands at the moment, so there's not much opportunity to get out and make photos. And after I've made the video with regards to the Rolei 35 LED and also the Rolei XF35, I thought it would be a good idea to make a video in more detail regarding rangefinder and viewfinder cameras. What actually is a rangefinder camera, and what is the difference between the two? So let's get started. So let's start off with a rangefinder camera. What actually is a rangefinder camera? Well, here I have an example. This is actually my biggest and heaviest rangefinder camera which I owned, and it's the Yashica Electro 35. What is specific with regards to a rangefinder camera? Well, the fact that it has a rangefinder focus mechanism in the camera. That means that you have a focused assist. When you look through the viewfinder, you either see a split screen or you see two identical images. With regards to this Yashica, you see two identical images. And the intention is to focus with the focus ring on the lens until the two images in your viewfinder coincide and fit exactly together to one single image, and then you know your image is in focus. That is what a rangefinder camera is all about. And that's the major difference, for example, with a viewfinder camera. A rangefinder camera can also be called a viewfinder camera. A viewfinder camera can never be called a rangefinder camera. So that's the major difference. The rangefinder, you're assisted in your focusing, and the viewfinder camera does not have the focusing assistance. That means you have to either measure or guess the lens to subject distance to get a sharp image. Of course, you can use zone focusing, which I'll be talking about in a minute. But this is the major difference and the reason why we call these cameras a rangefinder camera. Let's first have a look at three different types of rangefinder cameras. The first one is the Rolei XF35. I recently did a video on this camera, and it is a fully automatic fixed lens rangefinder camera. The only thing you can change with regards to this camera is the ISO level. I did give a tip in my video how to manipulate the light meter to enable you to change to another aperture. The second rangefinder I would like to show you is the Yashica Electro 35. This is the biggest and heaviest rangefinder I own, weighing in at 760 grams, and it is also a fixed lens rangefinder, again with the same focusing assistance when you look through the viewfinder. The difference in comparison to the XF35 is that it also has an aperture priority mode. That means you can adjust the aperture to your liking, and the camera will automatically adjust a correct shutter speed. The camera has an internal light meter, of course, with an over or under exposure warning. Just something interesting which I would like to point out with regards to the Yashica. I do have a separate viewfinder which you can attach to the cold shoe on top of the camera, which is meant for a tele and then wide angle adapting lens which you can purchase. I have both of these lenses. They're made by Yashica, and it is what I mentioned, a wide angle adapter and a tele adapter. The third camera to have a look at, and the third type of rangefinder camera, is this FED4. Same focusing assistance again when looking through the viewfinder, so you know we're dealing with a true rangefinder camera. Again, the difference here being the fact that it is a full manual camera. you can adjust the shutter speed and the aperture. An extra benefit with this camera is that you can also interchange or exchange the lens. In general, when we talk about rangefinders, these are the three types of rangefinder film cameras that you can find. Let's now look at a few different types of viewfinder cameras, ranging from fully manual to fully automatic, including autofocus. First of all, the aquarelle, which I made a video about, which is fully manual, meaning you can adjust the shutter speed and the aperture to your liking, and it also has an interchangeable lens. The Rolei 35 LED, also, which I made a video about, fully manual but a true viewfinder camera. Then we step over to a Fujica Compact 35, aperture priority, or a Konica C35, which is fully automatic and also has a built-in flash, all the way up to a Rolei autofocus, fully automatic and autofocus, but a true viewfinder camera. So what are the advantages of using a rangefinder camera? Well, the first thing I would like to say is the quality of the lens, especially the fact that the rear lens element in the lens is much closer to the film plane as opposed to using an SLR. This creates much less distortion and gives you a very good quality image. A second advantage of using a rangefinder camera is the size and weight of the camera, especially when we look at the Rolei 35 LED, because we do not need a prism or focusing screens or a mirror, which saves a lot of weight and creates a smaller size camera. A third advantage would be the size and also the quality of the lens, especially when you have a rangefinder with an interchangeable lens, as this Fed 4, for example. And here we see that we have a relatively small interchangeable lens, which is very light in weight and is also of very high image quality. Now we come to an important point, and that is a rangefinder is a very silent camera to use. Let me give you an example of the Yashica Electro 35. When we release the shutter, this is what we hear. Almost nothing. So rangefinder cameras are very silent cameras. Another interesting advantage is that the camera never blacks out. So when you look through the viewfinder, you'll always see your composition, even when you press the shutter. And that makes it interesting also for using the camera with both eyes open. So if I was to take a photo and make my composition, I can see around me who is entering the frame of my composition. And that's very interesting, for example, for street photography. Another interesting aspect is the fact that you do not have any shutter lag. There's no mirror mechanism that needs to go up before we can take the picture. So when we release the shutter, it immediately takes a picture. There are some disadvantages in using a rangefinder, and the same goes for a viewfinder camera, and that is the fact that we have to deal with parallax. We have a separate viewfinder as opposed to the lens. We're not looking through the lens when we compose our image. This means that we will never get exactly the image that we have been composing through the viewfinder. Some viewfinders, like with this Yashica, compensate for parallax, especially with subjects nearby, which is fine, but we'll never be able to achieve fully the same composition as we've seen through the viewfinder. Another important disadvantage is the fact that when you look through your viewfinder, sometimes you can see part of the lens. So part of your lens can be obstructing part of your viewfinder when you're composing your image. Rangefinders are complicated from a technical point of view and need regular servicing. And especially these old rangefinders, when they need repair, that can be very expensive. If you use a rangefinder with an interchangeable lens, you might want to use a telelens. We have a much shallower depth of field with a telelens. So it's going to be much more difficult if you're using a zone focusing system or a lens to subject estimation or measuring to get a sharp image. So that brings you down to the question, what is a rangefinder, or in that sense, a viewfinder, good for? Well, it's not a good camera for macro or close-up photography because that's just not possible with a rangefinder or a viewfinder camera. Portrait photography is also going to be very difficult because of the parallax. So those are subjects that I would avoid with a rangefinder camera. It is good for street photography, travel and landscape photography, absolutely, because it has a very sharp lens. When we look at street photography, it can be a very quick camera to use if we use a zone focus system, which means that we estimate the distance beforehand, set up the right aperture to give us the biggest possible depth of field, so there's no need to focus and we can immediately take the picture. Let's have a closer look at zone focusing. Zone focusing is the same for both a viewfinder camera and also a rangefinder camera. For example, this Aquarel has a smallest aperture of f16. So let's say we put it at f11. And of course, depending on the light and the film speed, we need to determine the appropriate shutter speed to go with the aperture of f11. If, for example, we were to put the scale to 5 meters, then the scale on the lens indicates to us that everything between, let's say, about 3 meters to 20 meters will be in focus. So once we determine a distance and an appropriate aperture, then we can determine within which distance a subject will be in focus. That makes it easy and not necessary to always focus on your subject to take the picture. And that makes this camera in a street photography environment very fast to use. Now that we've talked about viewfinder cameras and rangefinder cameras in more detail, I thought I'd just have a closer look at the Rolei XF35 and the Rolei 35 LED. First of all, when we look at the Rolei, it is a true rangefinder. So it provides you with focused assist when looking through the viewfinder, which is a great benefit. Do, however, take into account that in darker situations it will be much more difficult to pinpoint your focus with this system. The lens is actually very good. It is a 2.3 aperture, maximum aperture 40mm lens, and the maximum ISO is 400. So if you want to do street photography, for example, and you do not have the ideal light, take into account slower shutter speeds, which is a disadvantage in using this camera. When we look at the Rolei 35 LED, we see a 3.5 40mm lens, which is not a very bright lens, but we do see that we have an ISO level which goes up to 1600. Which makes it interesting to use higher speed films, for example in a street photography environment. An interesting additional advantage for the Rolei 35 is the fact that it offers a scale on the lens, so you can use zone focusing with a specific aperture and it will tell you the distance within a subject will be in focus. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope it was especially informative. I haven't been taking any photos in this video. It's more an explanation of rangefinders versus viewfinders, and especially on a budget level. If you have any questions, please put them forward to me. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.